Good morning, Mr. McKeown, and to all the witnesses, and Gormagat Cairlock. Mr. McKeown, I must say by the outset, between processing the best part of 700,000 or 800,000 PUP applications in 5 weeks, and your own attendance here being somewhat unwell, some people might say I'd have to go a little bit easy on you. So we do appreciate you being here today, and I know you had been feeling unwell. There's 3 areas that I want to cover today, and I suppose you could divide them into those questions which we have relating to what is in a very unusual period, which was the PUP, and those, I suppose, that we might normally have asked in a normal period. So let me focus first of all on the non-compliant procurement and the list that was provided to us of the 92 contracts. Almost all of them, Mr. McKeown, fall into what we might call the provision of local employment service contracts. And I think there's many people in the public and many public reps that will be quite surprised that household names in their own local constituencies that provide really valuable local employment services are considered by the Controller and Auditor General to have non-compliant procurements. And I imagine that's not a reflection on any of the services that they provide, but the procurement process. So can you talk to us about why the Controller and Auditor General considers those contracts non-compliant?
Certainly, Deputy, and just to say, as a department, we do value the local employment service ourselves, and I'm very aware and very sensitive to the uncertainty at the moment and to the that the local employment services are feeling. The situation arises, Deputy, because the department's in receipt of legal advice, which we got a number of years ago, actually, from the Chief State Solicitor's Office, and subsequently confirmed by the Attorney General, which we did query, and previously Senator Alice Mary Higgins provided material, and we had that queried as well. But I think the legal advice is clear and unambiguous that the process, which commenced over 25 years ago, of awarding annual contracts without any competitive procurement process is not compliant with EU procurement rules. And despite what people may think, it's not necessarily advice that we particularly welcomed, but it is the advice, and we do have to respect that advice, and we do have to act on it. And certainly as accounting officer, I've got to make sure that I act on it, because it's within my statutory function is to try to make sure that our procurement is legal. So that's the background to it, I suppose, Deputy. There's also one thing I'd also say is that even without the legal advice, I don't want to make too big a deal out of this, but good standards of governance would suggest that renewing or rolling over contracts without any kind of competitive process for 25 years isn't exactly good governance. So you do get into the classic governance issue of principal-agent relationships. So probably it would be, despite the legal advice and I think the Minister put her position on this on the record very clearly in the Dáil last week, it's probably something we might have had to consider anyway.
And the legal advice which many in the sector have made available, which indicates that under EU procurement rules, it might be possible not to tender out these services. Is that something that the department has given consideration to?
Absolutely, Deputy. And we haven't seen the detailed legal advice that ILDN, I think we are referring to, and they are a valuable advocacy group and representative body. We haven't seen the detailed legal advice. We've seen a summary of it, and it reflects what Senator Higgins previously brought to our attention, and that certainly was discussed with the legal advisors. And the view is that actually no, the situation is very clear. I mean, there's a couple of points on it, I think, Deputy, and I don't want to get into the detail of what I understand to be made partly because I'm outside the court the job, the Oireachtas. But there is, just because a service is social in nature doesn't mean that it's not also something that is of financial or economic interest. They're the two streams within the EU procurement rules. And in a situation where there are other providers available in the market, and this isn't just the Irish market, it's the EU market, who can provide similar services, well then the services have to be tendered. Effectively, that's the situation. And we did consider that advice, but there's no way of getting around it as far as we can see, and certainly that's the advice of the Attorney General.
Well, look, we might differ on that, but would you accept, Mr. McKeown, that while the tendering process may be required, the decision on the number of lots or the decision to move the service from a local employment service to a regional employment service, or the decision, for example, of the terms of that contract, for example, whether walk-ins will be permitted or not, and I don't wish to discuss the contract, but would you agree that all of those conditions of any new contract are decisions of the department, and that in directing the department to have compliant procurement, the Controller and Auditor General is not instructing in any way some of those terms that I covered, for example, lot sizes, number of lots, and the conditions of the contracts?
I'll come to that point now. I think it's fair to say, I don't want to speak for the Controller, I don't think the Controller is directing us. I think he's observing that the procurement that, excuse me, that the procurement that happened to date is not compliant. It's a matter down for the department to respond to that. So with regard to the tender design, part of the process we took when we became aware first of the obligation to tender these documents, and that's a number of years ago, we've taken a very deliberate and careful approach to how we would go about it. We commissioned Indicon to do 2 reports actually on the local employment service and job clubs. We then commissioned the Institute of Employability Studies and Social Finance International to also do another study. And they've all come to the conclusion, for good reasons, I think, Deputy, that there's an opportunity in the procurement to maybe deliver a more integrated service. And that's what it's really about, and it's really in the interest of the job seekers. At the moment, across the various job club and local employment services, we've got, I think it's about 66 different providers around the country. We've also got job path providers who've got our own service, and it's a bit of a confused landscape, I think, for job seekers. And the advice we got clearly in all those reports was to try to bring it together and integrate it. The other advice we got was that at the moment, all of the different services are involved. Ourselves, as Intro, Job Path, the Les and Job Clubs, are all broadly involved across a whole different cohort of job seekers. So the advice we got was to try to focus each different service provision on particular cohorts. So that kind of advice meant that we had to change things. Yeah. With regard to I don't get into the lots directly, Deputy, but one point I would make is that the lots don't mean, and we have yet to finalise the lots, but the lots don't mean absolutely have to translate into a single provider in each lot area. So I'll give you the example. In Donegal, where, as you know, is one of the 4 regions where we tried it out, and we are taking the learnings from that, the Donegal and Inishowen partnerships came together to put in a collaborative bid, Simi and Sligo and Leitrim. So although there was one lot where there were previously 2 providers, the 2 providers are still involved in Donegal and in Sligo and Leitrim, and that can continue. What we're trying to do is, within particular geographic areas, make sure that there's congruity. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the bodies within those areas are...
No, I accept that, Mr. McKeown, but I suppose the difficulty that many people in the sector and many people committed to the principle of partnership are seeing is that as we continue to treat each of these policy tools and the administration of these policy tools as services, it restricts the ability of local communities to come together in partnership to respond to local needs. So, you say that this is a contract that goes back 25 years. Communities like mine in Ballymun and Finglas and many other communities had real issues, had real pockets of disadvantage, and still have. And many of the partnerships were established to bring agencies together, to take a national focus away and to allow a local response. And the difficulty with having the SICAP contract tendered out as a contract, the LDS contract tendered out as a single contract, the idea of TUS and CE having more control by the department. The difficulty with all of those is that they make sense if we're replying to the Controller Auditor General, if we're analysing this as an accounting exercise. but they take the local focus away. And let me give you an example. So, for example, if there was a significant job loss in Dublin Port, for example, a local employment services that covers the North Inner City will be very equipped to handle that and to be able to put in place local solutions. Equally, if there was a particular drop in employment, and we saw this in Ballymun, where in 2010, 2011, we didn't have many of the new unemployed people that many other services had. What we had were people who we had successfully placed in employment that then came back. And those people required a different response than perhaps people in Glasnevin and Drumcondra that might have been experiencing unemployment for the first time. And so if we move away from local towards regional, we take the focus away, we take the ability of local communities to respond, and I'll come back to this point. This is about bringing all the stakeholders in an area together. And I think there's a lot of people asking the question, is the Department of Social Protection committed to the principle of partnership in the way that you would have championed it in the mid-90s?
So definitely, just on a few things there, I'd say, and again, I'd make the point I just made, the fact, if you look at the reports of Indicon and the Institute of Employability Studies, I think they've recommended, and one of my colleagues might correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have the papers in front of me, but they recommended, I think, 15 lots. We're going with considerably more than that. We haven't finalised it, but it will be considerably more than that. So it will be regional, but it won't be regional at the level that would, because we've taken on board the feedback. The second thing I'd say, Deputy, is that the existing providers are well positioned. They're sitting tenants, so to speak. There's no reason why they cannot get together, as I did in Donegal and as I did in Sligo Leitrim, and be successful in this process. And if they are successful, they will still be there. They will still be on the ground, and they can still respond locally. And I do take your point about when things happen. So, for example, Debenhams workers last year was another case in point. And the department does often self-take the lead on these and organises, and I think if you speak to the SIPTO officials, they'd be very positive about how the department engaged and worked not just with its own staff, but with local employment services and indeed with other service providers to provide it. And so the department will continue to coordinate and support that. With your question, can we champion partnership? I mean, we like partnership, but I think we have to operate within the rules. And the rules are that we have to procure this in a way that is open, that is transparent, and that is competitive.
Well, Mr. McGowan, to be fair, I do want to move on to another area, but I just finished by the point, I suppose in the past, the state made a decision to make sure that the rules focus on the local community, and I'd ask you to continue to do that in the way you implement the solution to the non-compliant procurement and the other reasons for which you're implementing it.
Deputy, you're